Well, good morning. You really look good out there. You know, the last time I was able to share with you up here was the very first Sabbath that we were in this new building. And so a lot of things have happened since then, almost 5 years ago. About 5 years ago, isn't it? In May, I believe it was. So we are here now, and one of the things that Lynn and I always did as we went from, and we lived in Korea, and about 4+ months of the year we were traveling somewhere, and but we always thought of this church as home. So I hope that you haven't completely forgotten us. I see a lot of familiar faces and a lot of new ones too. So it's just a blessing to be here this morning. When Pastor Kitney talked to me about coming and sharing with you, I said, should I do something that's an exegetical, nice biblical sermon? Or he said, well, you need to come and share about missions, because our church needs to keep in mind that there's a whole world out there that we need to remember that as a Seventh-day Adventist church, we're a world church, and that we need to be thinking about the people who are on the other side of the globe. And that's where we were. 14 time zones away is where we were. And so this morning, I will share with you a little bit about what you can get a little picture of some of the things that we were up to there in Asia. I have this passage here that I'd like to read together here, and it's John chapter 17, 14 through 20. I have given them your word, and the world has hated them, because they are not of the world, even as I am not of the world. I do not ask you to take them out of the world, but to keep them from the evil one. They are not of the world, even as I am not of the world. Sanctify them through the truth. Your word is truth. As you have sent me into the world, also I have sent them into the world. For their sakes I sanctify myself, that they themselves also may be sanctified in truth. I do not ask on behalf of those alone, but for those who believe in me through their word. He was talking to his disciples when he said those words. And those disciples went and made more disciples, and those disciples made more disciples, and those disciples made more disciples, and eventually made you a disciple. And then not only here in this part of the world, but it happened going the other direction too. Missionaries went on over and eventually ended up in India, and they ended up in Asia, and they ended up in China, they ended up in Japan, they ended up all over the world. And because of what Christ asked these disciples to do, we may have disciples all over the world. The territory where Lynn and I spent the last 5 years is there on the map. China, Mongolia, North and South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Macau. The Northern Asia Pacific Division, we have about 640,000 Seventh-day Adventists in that territory. Most of those are in mainland China. Now, you don't hear a lot of stories about ministry and mission in China, do you? There's a good reason for it. The reason is that it is dangerous for us to share a lot about what's happening in China. In fact, I've asked the camera people not to show pictures on the internet of some of the people I'm going to put on the screen. And if I'm talking a little bit vague sometimes about a place or not giving names, there's a reason for that. We want to protect our church members there, because in China, there are some places that are very open. I've had the privilege of going to some very large churches in China that are Seventh-day Adventist churches, and being the main speaker, no problem. And I've been in other places where when we're going to the meeting place, they come to the hotel, they put us in the back of a car with darkened windows, and they keep watching over their shoulder as they drive to the meeting place. And then when we get to the meeting place, they kind of look around and, okay, go right on in. Because we are, Lynn and I, for some reason, we stand out in Asia. And, it was like this jacket. When I had this made, the gal who made it, she's about this tall. And she just kind of, I think I can make one, through the interpreter. And so she made this jacket. But so you understand why some things are a little vague. But I want to tell you some stories about China and some other places too. And so you'll have a better understanding. Let's start with this gentleman here. He is standing there between Lynn and I, and he is a pastor in China. He has a church that is quite large, several hundred people, and he is the main pastor. And one day he ran into trouble with the government because the land that the building sat on was, I guess, some pretty nice property. And I don't know if some businessman in China, he said, I'd really like that property. And so the government's officials kind of said, it's Christian, so we should be able to figure this out and get that property easy enough. And so they just one day came and informed the pastor, you're no longer be able to have church here. You thought you owned this building, but you don't anymore. It belongs to the government, and we're going to tear this building down. What would you think if they came and told Pastor Kitney that about your building here? You would not be very happy church members, would you? So they went and what do you do when that happens? What do you think? They did a lot of praying. And they went down and they kind of stood arm in arm in front of the building. And the government says, we're taking it down. And all the people could do was just kind of back off as the big equipment came in, with a great big arm ready to reach up and tear the roof off of this building. And so they brought the thing up, and the people are off the side. They're praying to the Lord, please keep our church, protect our church. And the machinery came up, and the big claw came over, and it touches the building. The machinery quits. So they don't know what to do. They back the machine up, and all the mechanics come, and they work on it a little bit, and they come up, and so they're ready to tear the building down, and it comes up, and it goes, it just kind of touches the building, and it stops. Not working anymore. And they tried this and tried this. Let's bring in another piece of equipment. So they drove that one off, brought in another one, and it came up, and it was going to tear up the building, and it quit. Now, the government officials are getting worried. They're having they're almost believing in God. And they came and they told this pastor, you can keep your building. And that's the kind of stories that we've heard coming out of China. It was so exciting to hear him tell this story and how God had protected the building. Not always the case. There are some places in China where our buildings where Christian churches have been torn down. Another place where an Adventist church, the cross was torn off the top. They could still meet there, but the cross was torn off the top, and all the benches were put over on the side, and if they wanted to meet, they could sit on the floor. But they sat on the floor and they sang their songs, and they witnessed, and the churches continued to grow at a very strong rate. That's the kind of stories that are coming out of China today. I've given them your word, and the world has hated them because they are not of the world, even as I am not of the world. I do not ask you to take them out of the world, but to keep them from the evil one. And that's what happened in this story, that God protected them and kept them from the evil one. What a blessing to hear those kind of stories and to be a part of it. When Lynn and I would go around, we would share the things that a lot of times when we went to China, we would meet with a group of pastors, maybe 100, 150 pastors that would come from all different directions. And we would share with them about pastoral ministry, because education, Adventist education is pretty, there's not a lot of it going on in China, but there's some that we'll talk about later. But here's a chart that shows how many pastors there are in the different areas of the field there in Northern Asia Pacific Division. You can see that Korea has almost 900 pastors, Japan 81, Mongolia 32, Taiwan 78, Hong Kong 42, but the mainland China has over 5,000 pastors that are Seventh-day Adventists who are there seeking to share the message with God. You know, back around the Second World War and communism was becoming a part of taking over the government there and everything, foreign missionaries had to flee. And I think there were maybe 70,000 Seventh-day Adventists or something like that at that time. And so for many years, we had no contact, wondering whether the Seventh-day Adventist Church even survived. And so when we went back in, we found out there were about 3 times that many. So this Lord bless the church to grow even when we were not there. Living in Asia is a very interesting thing that I know some of you are from Asia, but when when Texas is home and you're all of a sudden transplanted to Asia, your world is just very different really quick. The buildings look different, and we lived in an apartment building. Is this ringing to you too, or just me? Would I do better with a microphone, or? We're good? Okay, if you're happy, I'm happy. But we lived in an apartment building, and we've never done that before. We've always had grass all the way around our house, and now we're on the 14th floor, and we found out that 98% of the people in the whole town, that's the way they lived, in these apartment buildings. But it works pretty well. Our food became very different. We would go into China and maybe be there for 3 weeks in several different locations, and we never saw a fork the whole time. And I remember I was trying to learn how to use the chopsticks, and someone's trying to teach me, but I'm left-handed and they're right-handed. That complicated it a little bit. So I'm struggling to pick up something so I don't starve to death. You see, I didn't. But I'm trying to pick something up, and the division president, he leans over to me and he says, "Our children learn how to use them." So I knew I had to, and I did. So we could go several weeks and didn't miss a fork, and I didn't even need it. So I know some of the people come from the West, they carry forks with them just for the purpose, but we didn't even do that. But the food's different. Not too many enchiladas, but other good things. Some things that you like, all of a sudden they're gone, and we took some Miracle Whip with us, but when it was gone, it was gone. And they do grow very lovely tomatoes, and Lynn makes very good bread, but it needs Miracle Whip. So, you do without some of those things. Family's a little bit of a trouble. This is how we would talk with grandkids. You can see through Skype. And there's 14 hours difference. And so you say, okay, what time is it there? Okay, it's early morning here, it's late evening there. You have to work out those things. So it makes it a little different life. Every time we were getting ready to travel, I had to say, okay, what kind of currency do I need to take with me? Am I going to China, Mongolia, whatever? So I had these envelopes that had all the different currencies in it, and I have to pull out to take with, depending on where the next trip might be. This is my mode of transportation going to the office. And you can see, well, actually, the little red cart was for going to the shopping, because you didn't just go to Walmart. You went to get what you wanted. You went to this shop, this shop, this shop, this shop, this shop, this shop, and buy your vegetables off the street, and you do pretty good. But you need a little red cart. And bicycle worked pretty good too. That's how we got around. Living in Korea, about 25 minutes away from the demilitarized zone, the DMZ, was a little bit of, sometimes you'd get a little nerve-wracking when the North Koreans would do their saber rattling that they do. And we went and visited. We actually even went inside the blue building where Lynn and I actually stepped into North Korea carefully for just a short couple of minutes, and then we were out. But that's North Korea on the other side, the big building. Most of the time when we were speaking, we did it with a translator. And so this was in Japan, and Lynn here is in Taiwan, and you can see, we call them, sometimes they don't call them a translator, they call them the interrupter. But I found there's something really good about translators. There's good and bad. The bad thing is that when you're saying something and then he has to translate it, your mind can work a lot faster than that, and so you'll start losing things if you're not careful. You have to really concentrate as a congregation when that's happening. The good thing is while he's talking, I can think about what to say next. And so I got, that helps in that way a lot. But there's always things lost in translation. And some translators we had were really good. And some of them, I'm not so sure. But I couldn't speak Chinese, so I didn't know. That person may have just said, I don't know what he's saying, but I've got something even better to tell you, so this is what I'm going to say. I don't know. But we did make some very good friends. Some of the things that we did find out there is you have to even think differently about the Bible. In China, dragons are a good thing. They are special, they are important, and dragons are good. And when the Bible calls the dragon something bad, we've got a problem. So what do you do? So I was trying to think about how to work around that, and actually they've worked around it. I think maybe they got different dragon words or something like that. But I got really smart, and I said, what we should do is, like in the Septuagint, it's the word drakon, which really talks about a serpent, a snake. And so let's call snakes bad. And then I went to Taiwan. And snakes are really good there in the mountains with Aboriginal people. They, it's part of their origins, part of their folklore. Everywhere you see this motif of the snake. So what do you do then? So you have to be careful about those things. Everywhere you go, other than Christianity shows up. Korea is the only country in Asia that has a population that is more Christian than any other religion. South Korea. North Korea, no, but South Korea. This here, Buddha, is quite large in Mongolia. This one was in China, and it was people coming there. This was Taoism. This was really, they have these parades they carry these demons around, it looks like, and everything, and they get their incense and they'll pray to these gods, and actually it's ancestor worship, a lot of it. This is why we need to remember about missions on the other side of the globe. In the United States, there are about 330 or 40 Seventh-day Adventists for 1 to 340 some or something like that. In Asia, it's about 1 to 1,600. So it's important for us to be continuing to think about missions in Asia and to grow the church there. There's a good fellow there, a friend of Lynn's that we found there. But sanctify them in the truth. Your word is truth, and you, as you have sent me into the world, I also have sent them into the world. God is sending people to China and to Mongolia and to Korea, and people need to continue to think about going. And here's where I need to really talk to you who are, if you're a young adult or even children. you can become a missionary. The age of missionaries is not over. We need missionaries who are willing to go to foreign lands. I remember the first time we got up to an orientation session at Andrews University, and they said, "You are now missionaries." And I thought, wait a minute. I've read Eric B. Hare's books, Clever Queen, Nile and the White Crocodile, all these things. And I said, that was missionaries. I'm going to be living in a big city. But now, today, good missionaries that we send out need to be willing to live in big cities. That's where the mission is. And you can prepare. You need to do some education and things. 336 cities in the world are over 1 million, and you can see there 171 are in the nation of China. Big cities is where ministry needs to be done today. And these cities, the history of the culture goes back hundreds and thousands of years. Some of the things that you will see and witness and that you're talking to go back much longer. When we talk about, the history of Texas, as we know it, we think 150, 60 years, it's not very long. But in those places, they go back a long way. Sanctify them in the truth. Your word is truth. As you have sent me into the world, also I send you into the world. It's about baptizing people and helping them give their lives to Jesus Christ. Lynn and I had an evangelistic series in Taiwan, and this Lynn here is baptizing one of the converts that we had at that time. In Mongolia, they've had a lot of success. The church in Mongolia is very young. Only about 20 years ago, there were no Seventh-day Adventists in Mongolia at all. But today, they have a church of over 2,000. And China itself is sending out missionaries. We're thinking about them being in the mission field. Well, this young lady here, a pastor, is going to Malaysia. She's in Malaysia, and she is working with a Chinese-speaking group of people there. Planted a church, growing the church. This young lady here that's standing next to me, this is in Mongolia, where I met her. And she was trained there in Mongolia, and she has been sent back into China in what's called Outer Mongolia, where they speak and are culturally like the Mongolians. And so there she does ministry there. Talk about people who are willing to give their lives for the gospel. Every year, there's a group about this size. And here we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And what these people have agreed to do is to give 6 years of their life to go and plant a church outside of their home country. So they'll go to Taiwan, they'll go to China, they'll go some to Kenya, some to Kyrgyzstan and different places. And they will spend the first year learning language, and then they spend 5 years to grow a church. Would you be willing to do that? Give 6 years of your life? Some of them sign up for the next 6 years again. It happens often. This group is very interesting and you see it's a very large group. These are all young people. And every one of them has agreed to give 1 year of their life. It's called the 1,000 Missionary Movement. And they have agreed to give 1 year of their life. And they go to the Philippines and they train in the Philippines for a few weeks, and then they send them out all over Asia, 2 by 2. Sometimes they're working with an existing church, sometimes they're planting churches. But they give it 1 year of their life, 1 year of their life. If you sent me into the world, also I have sent them into the world. God sends you into the world too. Within the borders of China, there are some very beautiful churches that belong to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. This is one and that I was very interested in because it's in a very small little village. It's the third Seventh-day Adventist church that's set on this property. The last one was taken out by a typhoon. But they rebuilt it, very beautiful. This one, it was built by the government for different Christian groups, but the Seventh-day Adventists have been asked to manage it. Very beautiful little church. This is a very large church in China that I had the privilege of speaking in to close to 1,000 people there that Sabbath. And I remember saying, will the Three Self people committee, will they be concerned if I speak? When they asked me, and they said, no problem, our pastor is on the committee. So in some areas, it works very well. Beautiful churches. Another one in another part of China, very beautiful church inside too. Things done a little differently sometimes in the church. This is a communion Sabbath, and you can see how the pastor and elders are dressed. What do you think about that? Would you be willing to do that, elders, and wear a robe that looks like a clerical robe? Your hymn book looks very different. And those of you who are musicians, you should be able to read the music, which is the numbers at the top of the words. And they'll take and set this on the piano, and they'll just play away. And they'll sing, and they can read it, but doing quite well. Here's a song. Would you like to hear a song? Should we sing a song? Is that okay? This is called Jesus is Real, and it's now I don't have the Chinese version, and I know some of you could read the Chinese, at least maybe the Wands probably could, but this is a song that we learned that we like very much. So let me sing it through for you. Wonderful and marvelous is Jesus to me, sweeter than the honey in the honeycomb is he. Jesus is real, he will never fail. I will love and serve him throughout all eternity. You want to try singing that first chorus with me? Wonderful and marvelous is Jesus to me, sweeter than the honey in the honeycomb is he. Jesus is real, he will never fail. I will love and serve him throughout all eternity. He is always with me as I'm walking along. I can hear a melody, he's given me a song. Jesus is real, he will never fail. I will love and serve him throughout all eternity. Now, they do sing a lot of the same hymns we do also. And with my iPad, I had a hymnal on there, and so once I heard what it was, I could look on and join them in songs. But here's something that you might find very unusual if this happened in your church. This was on the bulletin board in a church in Taiwan. And this is a list of the names of people, and then the bars there show how much tithe and offerings each person has given. Yeah, would you like that? Yeah. But on the other hand, in China, they will not pass the plate down the aisle because if you don't have offering to put in, you would lose face. And so they're not going to embarrass you. They have a box either in the front and sometimes it's in the back that you can drop your offering in. One box for offering, one box for tithe. But I don't know, I'm not sure if I'm ready to adopt that, but as he sent me into the world, I also have sent them into the world. For their sakes I sanctify myself, that they themselves also may be sanctified in truth. I do not ask on behalf of these alone, but for those who will believe in me through their word. And many people have begun to believe. This is a little school that Lynn and I spent 2 weeks at teaching. All of these here are students who are preparing to be pastors in churches. And so we had the opportunity to spend 2 weeks and to do teaching of these students about pastoral ministry. You know, interesting, you might say, pastoral ministry, we learned it in the United States. Would we be able to help anybody in the other side of the world? And I was worried about that at first. But what I found out is the principles are the same worldwide, at least Asia-wide in North America. But these students, there's one young man here, right here, this man right here. He came to us one day and he says, I had a dream. He says, and I think it was from God, but I don't know. He says, but I dreamed that in my lifetime, China would be a Christian nation. Wow. It's going to take a lot of missionaries to make that dream come true, and a God who can do that. He can work miracles, for sure. This is their dormitory. You can see it's quite cramped, a little room with 3 sets of bunk beds. This is their little library. And these little seminaries had kind of popped up here and there all around. And some of them are really good at training, and some of them are not so good, but they're all around. And so what we have actually begun to do is to put, we've been putting schools in China at different locations. We have 3, we're working on the 4th one now, where we will actually bring in instructors and teachers from other places, from Adventist schools, and when these students graduate, they will have a degree in theology from an Adventist institution. And they will be training those so that right now, a lot of what goes on in those classes is all translated. But pretty soon, we'll have a group of Chinese speakers who will be able to go in, no translation. But interestingly enough, this graduation service is not going on in China. It's going on in Korea, because we could not hold it in China, because the school is underground and not really there. This is an interesting story. I want to tell you a story about a few people. And I guess we're all right on our clock for a couple more minutes. This morning I got up and I said, I've got too many slides, and I cut out half of them. So I can tell you other stories another time. But this guy, young man, his name is David, and his wife is in the middle next to him. He has a fascinating story. He is a brand new Adventist. The gal in the check shirt, she is a brand new Adventist who introduced this couple to that church there, a very large church in Beijing, and they became Adventist. He has a very interesting occupation, and they took us on a tour. We spent the day with this couple, and he is a world-renowned Latin dancer. You know, tango and all these things, you know. He's one of the best. He studied in Cuba. He came back to China, and he's kind of saying, I close my studio on Sabbath now. Oh, that's good. I'm glad to hear that. But then his conscience kind of get to him. You know, he knows what Adventists believe because he's an Adventist now. He says, should I give up dancing? What should you tell a man like that? Then he was showing me pictures on his phone. And here he is. He's standing there. Next to him is she who is the president of China, standing next to him. You know, arms around each other. They're buddies. And I said, no one else has access like that. And if you give up dancing, you may give up your access. You know, it's like Daniel standing there next to the king. He's there. And he's kind of a national treasure in a sense because he's really good at it, I guess. I went online, Googled his name, found him, and he's pretty good at it. So all I could say to him is, you stay close to God, and God will tell you whether or not you should give it up. So I couldn't tell him to give it up, but he's a wonderful member of the church. Then there's the gentleman standing next to me with the name underneath it there. He is, this is in Beijing. There's a big church. It's actually built so the Sabbath worshipers worship on Sabbath, the Sunday worshipers worship on Sunday there. And And but on the backside of this church, they built this office specially just for him, as a receiving room for people who want to come and have audience with him, because he is a world-renowned physicist. He writes textbooks for the universities in physics, and he's a Seventh-day Adventist member there. So I'm telling you, we have some people who are quite prominent and able to do some good things. By the way, these are the two pastors of the churches here. And this is the gal here. She was in charge of ADRA for China. And that's and opportunities God is making them for sure. This is Mongolia. This is a picture in Mongolia. And everywhere you go in China, you have to have a group picture. It just happens. I used to say that an event did not happen unless it's on paper, and that's photographic paper. Because you go to the division office, and the walls are full of group pictures from all the different events and different things that go on. So we had to have this group picture. But there's also something very interesting that you have to be careful of, because they always put the most important people in the middle of the picture, front and center. And so if you tried to get into if you just happened to all of a sudden be standing in the middle and the division president's in the room too, you could be pushed aside really quick, because that's his place. And so, but I'll show you here that this is the division president here. Here's the division secretary, the division treasurer, some of the other folks here and everything. But you see that the most important people are in the middle. These are missionaries. In Mongolia, they went out from Ulaanbaatar to a small city, and where there were no Seventh-day Adventists. And they agreed to stay there. There were 1,000 missionaries, and they agreed to stay there for a year. In a little humble apartment, they went out visiting, giving Bible studies, and a year later when they left, there was a little church of 30 members, just from these two young ladies. She's from Mongolia, so she knew the language. She's a Korean. She's a science major at Samyuk University, and she agreed to give a year, and so they worked as a team, and they grew a church. Two young ladies out in remote Mongolia. They did it by themselves. This gentleman here, Bold is his name. He's in Mongolia, and he's quite bold. But his name is Bold, and we became very good friends. He has a fascinating story. He grew up as a Buddhist. His parents were Buddhist. He was a Buddhist. His twin sister was Buddhist. And he decided that when he was 17, his father died of an illness. And all of a sudden, the family's really pushed into poverty because he was the one bringing in the income. And he really trying to find answers to his questions and things. He decided he would become a Buddhist priest. So he applied to a monastery, and they said, we're full this year, come apply next year. But he found a Buddhist priest who let him follow him around, and do all his chores for him. And so he learned the prayers and the chants and all these things like that. He was on his way to be a Buddhist priest. His sister went and was attending a Seventh-day Adventist Bible study and invited him to come with. And he said, I don't need Christians or anything like that. And then he said, they're doing it in English. I could learn English if I went to this Bible study. His English is quite good today. But so he said he'd go to this Bible study and he'd learn English. And so it wasn't too long, because he's very good at presentations and everything. They have this Buddhist with felts telling the Bible stories for the Bible study. And he talked himself into being a Christian because he says, I found my answers. And now he has graduated with advanced degrees in theology at IS in the Philippines. He is now the vice president of the mission in Mongolia. Amazing stories that keep popping up everywhere we go. The Pancake Church. This is in Korea, Bohwa. She was a teenager, about 16 years old, And she decided, her mother asked her, "You really look sad on Sabbath. Why is that?" And her answer was, "I don't have any friends. I'm the only teenager in this little bitty church. And so what do we do?" Her mom thought a little bit. She says, "I think I know what to do." So she went and she'd mix up every day this batter or whatever for these Korean pancakes. And she would go out next to the high school and she would fry these things on the street and sell them to the kids. And she'd talk to the kids, and she'd talk to the kids, and pretty soon they were friends, and pretty soon she invited them to her house. Pretty soon she gave them Bible studies. Pretty soon they have a large group of 30, 40 young people who are really a small church. And they asked the conference, "Can we have a pastor?" And they said, "Well, we don't have the resources." So the dad says, "I'll go to school and I'll get a degree and I'll come back and pastor this." How do you finance that? Well, it was financed by the mother selling pancakes. The daughter also went and got her theology degree. And it all happened while the mom sold every day pancakes. And now they have a very nice congregation. All young people, almost all young people. Powerful group that's growing very rapidly and bringing more and more young people in all the time. Oh, yes, this is in China. We talked about the pioneer missionary movement pastors. You saw that. Remember that group of 9 pastors who were going out? Well, some of them end up in China. And this one, they go in. They can't go in as missionaries. They go in sometimes as students. They go in on work visas, whatever they can to get into China. Once he's there, how does he reach his community? Because he can't go out and evangelize, really. So what he decided to do was make pizzas. He opened a pizza shop, and people came in. And they would call on the phone, and they'd order pizzas. And every time he delivered a pizza, in the box was literature for the church. And over time, he was able to start giving Bible studies. And now there are 6 PM pizzas in that big city, all sharing the gospel, all helping the church to grow. Wow, maybe you can start making pizzas here. And this is inside, just shows some pictures inside their pizza shop. So, Pastor Howe, do you know where the largest Seventh-day Adventist church in the world is? It's in China. There's the pastor next to Len. Pastor Howe is the pastor of the largest Seventh-day Adventist church in the world. She has, about 7,000 in her congregation, and then she has about 110 daughter churches out and about. She's like a conference president. But it's interesting. She started with about 30 people in a house, in a room. And they just said, "What does God want us to do? Let's be about it." And she led them to grow. But, how did they do that? What they did was, after they'd grown and they had a nice building, it turned out that their building was the nicest building in town to have a wedding in. And it was heated, which is in China, that's interesting. There are a lot of places that we went in China that we froze because no heat. But they would, they just rolled out the red carpet and made these weddings wonderful for the couples. It wasn't too long that after the wedding, they would check on them, "How you doing?" And then baby comes along, "Oh, here's baby things you might need, and here's how you need to do, and training, and so on and so forth." And they started growing their church just by being nice to people like that. It wasn't that they came on Sabbath every Sabbath and just said hello to each other. They were out doing things in the community. And so now she's the pastor of the largest Seventh-day Adventist church in the world. Something interesting about China, and these are some groups that we went and did training with. But I want you to notice something. Now, there's a couple of children here. There's a young girl here, and there's a young girl here. But all the rest are pastors. All the rest are pastors. Do you see anything about that picture that jumps out at you? There's not many men there, are there? Probably 70% of the pastors in China are women. And that we found that wherever we went, especially in the South, as we went up, like the Beijing, this group, you see, there are a few more men, but it's mostly the majority of women. This one in Changchun, it's mostly women. They are the ones who are really running the church. There in Beijing, again, a different group. There's the women who are running the church. Now, I know our church has debated it for, about whether women can be in ministry and everything. In China, since they were separate from the world church for a while, it never came up as an argument. God can call a man, he can call a woman, whoever he calls, that's who should lead. No problems. So maybe they could give us some examples for us. They are not of the world, even as I am not of the world. Sanctify them in truth. Your word is truth. As you sent me into the world, also I've sent you into the world. And God has sent many, many, many of those people to do that. One more story for you. This is in Korea, Pangsong Seventh-day Adventist Church. It was a small church, not too far from the U.S. military base, and it was dying church. They had 8 members, lots of gray hair, 8 members. What should we do? What would you be willing to do to make your church grow? That's going to be the question we're going to ask here. Because what they did is they discovered that since they're near the military base, all around them is a community that speaks English. Now, there's 8 members of this church. None of them spoke English. But what they did was they decided that we have to do what's necessary to reach our community. And our community speaks English. So they opened the doors, and the service is all in English. And you'll see there's a gentleman back over here. He's translating for those who need the message in Korean. But they were willing, the whole church decided we're willing to do what's necessary to help our church grow. And they said, we will even allow it to be in a different language than we like. We will allow a different culture to come into the church because the church will grow. And they were right, because there's 40 or 50 people that meet there now on Sabbath. So, have you seen this church before? It's not in Asia. It's right here. And so the question I want to leave you with is, because we have the gospel commission, what are you willing to do to make this church grow? What are you willing to give up personally? What are you willing to be uncomfortable about so that others can find comfort here and find God? That's the challenge I want to leave you with. Don't forget the missions and things all the way around the world, 14 hours away. But there you have a church right here. And I know that church is here because miracles happened. And because God wants it here. And God has a great future for this church. But what are you willing to do to make that happen? If God says, I want you to do this or that, will you say, oh, that's not my culture? Or will you say, if I'm convinced God wants it, I will do it? Thank you. Our Father in heaven, we are so grateful to be here in your house today. Lord, this is a building that you have placed here according to your purposes. Lord, all around the world you have your disciples who are doing all kinds of unusual things to grow your church. Lord, continue to be with this church, with the leadership, with Pastor Kentney, with all as they plan for the future, that this church may do what you want it to on this part of your vineyard. We thank you, and we ask for a very special blessing on everyone who's attending here this day. In Jesus' name, amen. Our Father in heaven, we are so grateful to be here in your house today. Lord, this is a building that you have placed here according to your purposes. Lord, all around the world you have your disciples who are doing all kinds of unusual things to grow your church. Lord, continue to be with this church, with the leadership, with Pastor Kentney, with all as they plan for the future, that this church may do what you want it to on this part of your vineyard. We thank you, and we ask for a very special blessing on everyone who's attending here this day. In Jesus' name, amen.